Isn't it awesome? He also deadlifts he deadlifted 400 and I think. We're hoping to.
Yeah.
With your ring finger?
Yeah. Like this.
You moved.
Or you.
We have to ask first, and now it's too late. Not only you can't move, you're going into stocks. Okay, quick announcement. I said we were gonna have a quiz today, but we will do on Monday. 8 questions on 879 to 891. Everyone hear that? Quiz Monday. 8, should we go 9? 10? 110? I'm looking at 8 or 9 questions. I have 8 right now. I'll go back through and make sure they're the ones I want, but I decided we got to do it. So, and then we go right into populism. We're probably going to have a kind of mini test because this is going to be a really big unit. So we might have a regular test, but it'd be like one of those maybe 15 multiple choice and like 2 short IUs for labor unions, social Darwinism, and populism, which we'll get to. So probably in next week. We have an assembly next. Oh no. Oh no, we're fine there. Friday there's an assembly. And that's fine. And then the week after that, that's when registrations. The councils will come on like whatever it is. I think it's the 9th of February. So registration starts. Is that exciting? You gotta plan your next year. Teams.
We'll get to
Okay. Speaking of that, let's go take your notes out. What day is it?
It's Friday.
It's Friday. Oh. It's Friday. And by the way, before we get started, there's something I think you guys have been a little more advanced in noticing. Before we get to the flamingo, have you noticed how the rug ties the whole room together? Yeah. It's one of those things. Oh, drum roll, please. Yeah, drum roll. Drum roll. Drum roll. Are you ready? Are you ready? Yes, come on, give it up. Give it up. Come on. Look at the majestic, the majesty of the rat in the aura, the glow. So much here. I've seen Garfield. Perfect. I've seen the pinata and Atomic Bomb. That's pretty cool too, huh? Yeah, don't shake it. You might get candy. You might not. I don't know how much plutonium. Yeah, we'll take a day and learn how to make plutonium. So, what are we finishing Earth? Guys? Oh, propaganda. Who did the propaganda indeed? What group would do revolutionary terrorism? Which group? They're the most radical socialists, anarchists, and who would write the Communist Manifesto? Engels. And workers are exploited, according to Marx, by what part of capitalism? Yep, wage system and monopolies. But then he kind of had this dictatorship of the proletariat, which is a little bit shaky. We are a little behind in this class. How do we get behind third period? Who do we blame? Me.
Yeah.
All I've done for you, and you turn on me like this. Yeah, it's my fault. Okay, so we got to get going. Did I show you? We got through this. Marcel the Beard. Yeah. Oh, it's communism, left or right on the political spectrum? Left. What's the most right point of view? Fascism. And let me ask you one more thing. Speaking of left or right, just to review. Would nativism be left or right? Right. How about social Darwinism? The more social Darwinistic you are you more right or left? Left. But it's very inadequate. Very inadequate. Because life is much more complex. It just is. So when people say left or right, they misuse it. And we'll get things like, calling people a communist fascist. And that's where you go, okay. Wow, that's why it's inadequate. We got here. We get here. Did I tell you about the terrorist attacks? So they start doing, did I mention how they even shot the president of the United States, anarchists? And so pretty soon they became labeled as bomb-throwing anarchists. And that became a way to attack anybody who wanted similar things that the socialists wanted. Remember, the socialists wanted better working conditions. The socialists wanted equal rights by race or sex. Well, what a way to attack them. That they're a radical revolutionary bent on destruction. And so this would also be used by natives, as I mentioned before. So bomb-throwing anarchists, this epitaph would be used by those who favor capitalism by attacking labor unions. You want better working conditions? You're a bomb-throwing anarchist. You want to get rid of Jim Crow laws? Bomb-throwing anarchist. Women equal to men? Bomb-throwing anarchist. And to give you an example of this, there's plenty of signs of this, like integration is communism out there. Oh, here's another one, how this will be used for nativism. Put them and keep them out. Anarchists. Justice. About into the United States, knows the comical bomb. And revolutionary newspapers. And then, of course, mismatching pants and vote. Only a communist would wear checkered pants with a solid coat. Right? You with me on that? So here's anti-civil rights thing attacking Martin Luther King and all lies. These billboards were put up all over by those attacking civil rights. That King's a communist. In communist, this was put out in communist training school. I do like this. Martin Luther King's a troublemaker, a liar, smash communism. Was he a communist? No. But it was very effective. Now, I should add, he was a very moderate, what we call a democratic socialist. He believed in workers' rights. He worked very much hand in hand with unions. He believed in equal rights by the basis of sex. But he certainly was no communist. But that was a way to attack the civil rights movement. We will get to how unpopular Martin Luther King was when he was assassinated amongst the vast majority of the population. Tended to be by color in 1968. We'll get to that. So, speaking of that, the left was too divided to really unify. And so naturally, I give you one of the more famous bits of Greek mythology, Saturn devouring his son. Okay, that's just a heck of a pain, you got to admit, right? But the left were so bitter enemies that they couldn't unify, and that would always give them an open for others. For those who believed in more laissez-faire, or more importantly, the 20th century, or fascists. I told you in here how the communists and socialists would not unify in Germany. And that would help lead to Hitler able to become chancellor through their constitution. He didn't do a revolution. He was picked to stop the communists and socialists. So let's get to real world events. So we went through all this kind of theoretical stuff all the way from the Second Industrial Revolution, incredibly important. The social Darwinism, communism, socialism, etc. Well, let's get to the Panic of 1873. Because what's actually going on? Well, there was economic depression after the war, a little bit of an increase, and then an absolute catastrophe economic. We can't go into every detail for the Panic of 1873, but it stemmed from two different things. First off, over-speculation, especially real estate. There was a massive over-speculation in real estate that created a bubble. Bubble meaning the prices keep going up more and more and more. The prices for real estate became overvalued, where all it takes is pop, where the prices begin to tumble, and there's nothing to hold the prices fall. Pop, prices falling out. There's also just the beginning of the stock market. We see all the speculation there. But banks were loaning money to people to buy real estate. And everybody just assumed the prices would go up and up and up and up. There was also overproduction. This was the first big railroad boom after the Civil War. And remember, if you build railroads, it's not just railroads, it's steel, wood, coal, everything else. And they made more than what the market could bear. And it wasn't really planned. And don't forget, the Transcontinental Railroad just came in, so that was kind of a tribute to this. So railroads are in cutthroat competition and prices had to tumble. And then there's one more thing. There was a really hackneyed financial system, and it would have made no sense really to us in 1860. And they tried to stabilize it with what's called the Coinage Act of 1873. It went on a formal economic system called the gold standard. Now, we mentioned before that gold-backed currency, but now this is a formal system of how much gold a country holds in relationship to its currency. Now, during the Civil War, the US government issued greenbacks, just currency that wasn't backed by gold. People were still spending those. Once this law was passed, boom, all those greenbacks were worthless. They wouldn't take it. What happened to the value of money if you all of a sudden take 40% of the dollars out of circulation? Does it go up or down? It goes way up. What do we call that? Deflation. All of these things led to deflation. When the bubble burst, prices tumbled for real estate. Over speculation, they built more railroads than the market could buy. Prices dropped. And then the gold standard. Farmers will soon dub this the crime of 73. And this played on a lot of people's idea that if money is backed by gold, something directly backed in its system, well, gold, makes sense. It's valuable. People thought the monetary system would be more stable. Would it be more stable? Absolutely not. The gold standard would be a disaster, and I will get to it. It's amazing how many people still think the gold standard was good. And you get people all the time talking about gold is still money. It is not money. It is just a commodity now that people buy and sell. There's a bubble in gold right now. Did anyone notice that? The worldwide economy is in such shaky, shaky. It's kind of scary shape. The worldwide economy. That people are buying gold because they're worried about the future. And the United States has broken so many treaties the last month or last year that they're not trusting US Treasury. So they're buying gold. So this bubble. We're on really shaky time. Doesn't mean there'll be a bust. I'll explain how that happens in a little bit. But that's why gold prices are going up. Silver prices are going up, and that's pure bubble. So, this is the bank hand. So just imagine you have all these banks who are making loans, because we're all making money to build more railroads, but more importantly, to buy real estate. And now all of a sudden, these people who bought all this land, the prices tumble, and they pay their loans back. So what happens to the banks? Where do banks get their money, especially then? Where did banks get their money to loan out to people? Anybody have a savings account? Yeah. If you have a savings account, people would deposit their money. Meaning, literally, if you have a savings account, you're loaning money to the bank. They pay you to do that. That's called interest. And then what do they do with that money when you loan it? When you have open a savings account, aka loan them money. What do they do with that money? Huh? They loan to other people. So they don't have your money. They don't have your money. There's not some little box, like your J Parker just $100 or whatever, they don't have that. It's gone. They're assuming that all the people who have deposits won't come at once. So they pay back a few. Just imagine that all of a sudden banks loan everything out because we're all making money. We have no worries. Everything's great. All of a sudden people can't pay back their debts. What's going to happen? Let's say you hear that people aren't paying back their debts. And the bank, they might go out of business. If a bank goes out of business, what happens to your deposit? In 1873, if a bank went out of business, your money just. So what would you do if you heard the bank might go out of business? And you know they don't have all the money? They might just have enough money for a few depositors. What will you do? You'll do what? Say, I didn't hear you. No, I just didn't hear you. I didn't hear you. What would you do? Wouldn't you run to the bank right away, get your money out before everybody else? Is that what you said? Lynn? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Anna. What if everyone says? It turns into a panic. And that's what this is. Everybody running to the bank at the same time, and there they are. He's literally pushing them away, and they're trying to lock the door and get out. That's a bank panic. That's, so you know why they call it a financial panic? That's why they call it a panic. When you have a piece of paper that you thought was worth something, you found out it might not be, what do? Panic. Banks started shutting their doors, and this will trigger not just any depression, a catastrophe worldwide. Worldwide. After this bank panic, the banks that survived would initiate what's called a credit freeze. A credit freeze is basically where banks that survive are scared to loan money. It doesn't matter. They just, before, hey, we're all getting rich. Now, So who was born in 2008? So we had a depression that year. I'm not blaming you. Okay, I'm blaming you. The depression you guys caused would lead to a credit freeze that lasted for nearly 5 years. That banks were afraid to loan money. Nobody wanted to buy. Nobody wanted, I mean, it was just a catastrophe. So the worst of the depression ended in 2009, but we really didn't grow out of it. We really didn't grow out of it until about 2014 of the depression that started because of you guys being born. And who was born in 2009? See, that's the worst year of the unemployment. So I blame you for putting people out of work. We had people caught the panic, and what? I couldn't stop you. Huh? That's what populist. Over 18,000 businesses shut their doors, but the problem is, what section of the country had most of the business and manufacturing? North. And but more and more they're still calling it the Northwest. Is that what the Northwest of the original US? They're still calling it that. But some of you, they would say the old Northwest. This is the old Northwest, the new Northwest. So, but it's really hitting the Northeast more. Oh, farms are just being hammered, but farms are different. Remember, if businesses shut their door, that means workers who work there, their sole means of survival is now gone. Therefore, over 20% of unemployment. Now, it's hard today to figure out these numbers. We're just estimating that. It's really hard today, especially when unemployment begins to go up very quickly, like it did in 2009, or like when the whole world shut down during COVID. Unemployment just skyrocketed. And so it's really hard to figure out when it goes fast. But the point is, overnight, all of a sudden, you have people who their sole means of survival was going to whoever at the capital, going to them and getting a job and earning a wage. And now all of a sudden, they've either shut their doors or no one's buying their stuff. So what do? They fire workers. Just imagine what you would do if you look around and see your friend, you are losing your jobs. How would you act? If you're a psychopath, maybe, or a sociopath, you laugh. But other than that, let's assume we're not sociopaths. And if you are, you wouldn't come to me. So, would you say, oh, my friends are losing their job. It's a great time to buy a new house. Would you sit on your money too? You might be next. If all of a sudden things get bad today, you might think tomorrow. So you start sitting on your money. What happens to the demand for goods? Even for people who didn't lose their jobs. Tanks. Demand drop and companies begin to lay off workers, or they just go under and fire. It didn't matter if you were the best worker in the world, the smartest, hardest working person, you would have died for that company. If that company goes out of business because it's not selling goods, you still lose your job. Doesn't matter if you're the best worker in the world. If they're not selling their stuff and they do cutbacks because they just aren't making profit, you still lose your job. Now remember social Darwinist thinking. It said that poor people were poor because of what? They were what? And drinking away and what's that? Yeah, lazy, morally corrupt, all that kind of stuff. Wait a minute. These are people who are the hardest working, and also some people might not have been. They still lose their jobs. Are they just morally corrupt why they lost their job? You see the issue here. Most people then, as of today, are one paycheck away. One paycheck away from destitution. 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So one lost paycheck is going to be a catastrophe. And that's what it was today. And it didn't matter if you're the hardest worker, if there's no one buying. Social Darwinism aggravated. You decide. But that's what was happening. Oh, look at the fight. This is an interesting thing. So the banking system was pretty shady. 73, look how many banks shut their doors. But look at the worst years. It wasn't when the crash hit. It was years of depression in 77, 78. The Great Depression. Okay, the Depression actually began in 28. The crash was in 29. But the worst year, the worst time, was the winter of 32, 33. That's when the US just about ended. Just about ended. I should add, it was World War II. 20% unemployment leads to a catastrophe. Yeah. Being furloughed or laid off? Furloughed implies that your job is not gone. We just, for whatever reason, cannot keep you hired. So if you're furloughed, it means that sometime down the road, we plan on giving your job back. We just can't afford to pay you to it. So like, well, the federal government, like when they had the shutdown, the furlough workers, I was still there. Layoff, we are something good, so we're trimming back our workers. There's no promise that you'll be the job. So that explains it. So, oh, I should add 20% unemployment. That leads to civil war. That leads to, gee, I wonder what country would have 25% unemployment and go in a very dark direction. Think of any place. I can't think of any place in Central Europe with the capital building. Hitler took power because of inflation. I mean, because of unemployment, not inflation. Unemployment. No, act like I didn't say that. So, wages and profits begin to drop, and it begins a catastrophe. Hey, don't forget, we as a consumer might think, hey, prices are dropping, that's great. No, if it happens to everything, the entire economy crashes. So, after 4 years of misery and increasing unemployment, this would lead to the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Now you notice this is right after Hayes became president in the Compromise of 1877. Reconstruction has just ended. So the B&O Railroad, which was one of the most profitable railroads, the New York Central would pass it. But its main line was the first one to connect the East Coast to Chicago. So that's a really profitable railroad. It went right along this line here. Well, the B&O Railroad had already cut their wages 2 times, and now they did another wage cut. Okay, I should have put wage, but for some reason I put that. So it's a wage cut. Why did the B&O Railroad cut their wages? And let me add one more qualifier. In 1876, their profits were up. I mean, they still had profits. I didn't mean up. They still had profits, but just not as high as they were in 1870. So they're still making money. They're not losing money. They're just not making as much as they used to. Why did they cut wages? What does unemployment do to wages? It drops them because workers are afraid to ask for higher wages because they know there are 100 people out there that will take their job because they're unemployed. And so they cut wages, not because of any any factor of losing money. They cut wages because they. Does everyone catch the difference? So we can cut wages because you have no choice. So we can gouge. Because what are you going to do? But this time the workers have had enough. starting in Wheeling, West Virginia, but soon spread up and down the B&O Railroad. So imagine up and down this line. Yeah, the B&O went basically here, and then kind of went like this, and then branched out like that. Starting in Wheeling, but the big thing is went to Pittsburgh. Remember, Pittsburgh was just starting the steel industry. A massive, spontaneous strike. It wasn't like an organized strike. It was just workers saying we've had enough. And they went onto the tracks and they blocked the tracks. And once it spread, boom, we're not going to let trains go. We will not sit and take this. Well, Pennsylvania did what Pennsylvania always did. Their governor sent out their state militia to, are they going to help the workers or the B&O Railroad? They're going to crush the strikers and force them back to work, knock some stalls in, and fire the one, and then they can fire the ones who instigated it. But this is after 4 years of that. I mentioned before, remember the militia came out? What kind of people made up the militia? In Pittsburgh, where this is happening. The same kind of people. What did they do? They joined. The militia joined. And once that happened, boom, the strike went nationwide. It went up and down the B&O and then up and down every railroad. And soon other workers came out, unemployed workers, and there's this spontaneous uprising all over the United States. It basically paralyzed railroad transportation for the entire Northeast. It paralyzed new manufacturing. It was a shock, and it would be called, they didn't want to say revolution of 1877. I think you understand why. And we just had a revolt called the Civil War. So they called it the Great Upheaval. So the Depression you guys started, they didn't want to call it a Depression because of the Great Depression was so bad. So they called it the Great Recession. Okay, whatever. But the Great Upheaval. In fact, workers stormed into City Hall in St. Louis and took over the city government. They made their own flag and started passing laws like landlords can't kick people out of their homes. And they start ripping up mortgages and debts. It only lasted about 3 weeks, but they did that. In fact, they made up their own flag. So back in 1871, working people in Paris took over Paris in the outcome of the effects of the Franco-Prussian War. And they created a workers' commune, they called it. And they were communists. And they took the flag that came to represent them from, this goes back to, okay, there's been 4 French revolutions. So one of the previous French revolutions. And what color flag did they use to represent it on? Red, for the color of patriots' blood. And then they, in Paris, and then this kind of workers' commune, which it was doomed to collapse. They embroidered a symbol on it, a loaf of bread with a sword to it. Well, why would you make a flag with a loaf of bread on it? Are you really radicals, or are you what? You're hungry. Hungry. Most people just want a better life and security and spoke for their children. They didn't want to radically change the government. They weren't bomb-throwing anarchists. They were people who were terrified. By the way, if you run into authoritarian dictatorship, what do you do? Make sure that people have what? Food and something to preoccupy them. Maybe it's reading than to watch on the video. I can't think of anything that would be like that in China. I can't think of anything. And now let me get some Doritos. Okay, moving on. So, Governor B. Hayes would initiate a 73-year-old law called the Insurrection. And that allowed him to federalize the militia and send in federal troops. And Reconstruction had just ended. So they're going to put this down with federal troops. Now, the Army is tiny, And in fact, most of the US Army is either fresh from Reconstruction duty or in the West. Remember, this is just after Custer and Battle of Little Bighorn. Well, they use black soldiers in segregated units, fresh from Reconstruction, to put down white strikers in the North. Do you catch it? They won't unify because of racism. And it worked so well at putting down the strikes that soon black soldiers would be used to put down white workers for the next 50 years. For example, mining was so unbelievably dangerous. And conditions were so bad, pay was so bad, and there were strikes all over, especially Butte. So 2 regiments of black soldiers were in Missouri for that purpose, to put down strikes. According to them. So this happened all over. Racism, once again, and this should remind you of Bacon's Rebellion. Remember Bacon's Rebellion? So, in the strike was put down, almost 200 people would be killed. Fortunately, the Civil War did not turn into full-scale Civil War, even though it showed the situation in the federal government. The situation was that dangerous. The federal government would create what's called the National Guard. Hey, the National Guard. State militia, but it would be trained by the United States Army, which is in the Constitution, the Second Amendment, well-regulated militia, and it says that the federal government will train it in the Article 1 of the Constitution. So Article 1 in the Second Amendment. Militia, or will organize, regulate, and can be federalized, being taken over by the national government. And I mentioned the Insurrection Act. The last time it was used in 1992. It's called the Rodney King riots. President Trump has been threatening to use the Insurrection Act for the last 6 months. Sending federal troops. And so that's where we're at right now. So that's what happened here. Oh, and then every town would have an armory, not just for the storage of the weapons for the National Guard, but also it'd be a little fort just in case. And it showed a couple things. Labor has power if they're organized. They can shut down the entire country. And it also showed capital's greatest fear. Those who had the factories, a unified working class. What are nativists? The immigrant workers separate from native or from nativist workers. And one more thing. It showed that there is a business cycle. They thought there was. But there is a cycle that's endemic in capitalism, where you're going to get a boom and a bust. So I would sometimes call the business cycle the boom bust cycle. The boom bust cycle. And realizing what the boom bust cycle will be one of the key moments in the history of the world. Figuring this out. Now, of course, there's going to be different interpretations. So figuring this out is going to lead to incredible dissension and argument. Thus, we must draw this. We're going to draw the boom bust cycle. So I'm going to draw you this semester 3 economic diagrams through hard, real economics in this class because they're so important for our history. First one, boom bust. In about a month, I'll do conservative or trickle-down economics. I'll show you the diagram how that works. And then a few weeks after that, I will show you liberal or Keynesian economics. So when we get to the 20s, trickle down. When we get to the 30s and the New Deal, liberal or Keynesian. I got to need Keynes. So this is the first one. Boom bust cycle. Leave yourself a room. You're going to make a kind of a circle with a bunch of stuff in it. And I'm going to show you some hard economics. I'm simplifying it. You'll all be able to understand it. But it tells you it's what happens to this day. You can plug in events now. So let's get to it. Like my pen? What this might be too light. This look good? Everyone happy with this? Boom! Is that cool? You put little explosions around it. What happens when there's a boom? Let's give you some things that happen during a boom. Okay. Boom. The economy is cooking along. So let's look at things that happen. First off, what happens for demand for goods? People are buying stuff. People want stuff. So we're making a circle, but we got to put this down. That's supposed to be an arrow going up. Just imagine an arrow going up. That better? Not much. Okay. Next, what's happening to prices, up or down? If people want stuff, the best way to look at it is they literally bid the prices up. Prices are going up. What's happening to production? Now, we're going to use a different term than production. The term for production is supply. So people want goods, supply goods. If people are buying stuff, what are producers doing? Making more. This is my way of making more. Another arrow. Hey, what's happening to wages? Oh, I forgot something. What do we call when prices going up? Is this inflation or deflation? Inflation, right? I know inflation, deflation, sometimes get mixed up. Inflation, your dollar doesn't buy as much, prices go up. Deflation, your dollar buys more, but prices go up. So, wages, are wages up or down? Skyrocketing. What's happening to unemployment? Down. More, if there's low unemployment, wages go up. Because companies literally have to bid on workers. How about credit? Are banks willing to loan money in good times? Like mad. So here's another one. What happens to debt? It goes up. Now you might think, hey, wait a second. If you're in debt already, wouldn't a boom time be a good time to pay it back? You have more money? No. Okay, let me phrase something. No, that's not the way people think. Yes, that's what they should do. No, that's not what they think. Because of this last thing. What is the mood of the country? It's going to go on forever. We're all going to get rich. This boom will never end. Buy, buy, buy. You're a fool not to buy more real estate. Invest in more stock. The country's going to get stronger and richer. Get rich. It's never going to end. Now I know what you're saying. Wait a second. Don't booms always end? And the answer is yes, but not this time. Not this time. And it happens, I want to be clear about this, every time. I can remember in the 1990s, people were saying we have a new economy and there'll never be another bust. I remember 2005, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, was saying home prices will never drop. The real estate bubble happened and the entire economy crashed. And people said, what were the little things that people sold that, it's not like it's related to cryptocurrency, which is also just proof of speculation and crime. Bitcoin's a form of, what's in it? Yeah. Bitcoin's a form of that. What are those things like little pictures they would sell? You know what I'm talking about? And yeah, those were they were just good. And people are buying them like mad, and what happened to the price of those? What are you doing? You're buying a cheap little cartoon. Speculative booms, I always think it goes up and it always collapses. But I do like this. I have to add a qualifier, except this time. This time will be different. So, mood is buoyant. So what happens every single time? Here's where it makes the curve. And it's a twofold thing. First off, if we're all getting rich, that is going to begin speculation. Speculation. More speculation. Hey, If stop, everyone's making more money, let's just start borrowing more and more money and buying land. Borrowing more money and buying stock, or buying NFTs, or credit default swaps, or derivative-based assets. Maybe someday I'll tell you about derivative-based assets, it will blow your mind out. But just start, because we're all making money, and something else even bigger happens. So at this beginning of speculation, you're a fool not to buy it now. You're a fool. The prices are only going to keep going. And then we get the biggie. What's going to happen when all of a sudden people are selling more stuff? What's going to happen to supply? If prices are going up, what happens to supply? Keeps going up. And eventually you get oversupply. And there's not a moment this happens. It's not like, oh, if you hit this number and lights go on. No, you don't know when it happens. You don't know when speculation is getting too high, and you don't know when oversupply is happening. There's a sense of it, but you don't know. So all of a sudden there's oversupply. They start producing more goods. So supply is going up too fast. Supply. Now, it might not be noticeable to the average consumer, but let's say you had a business. You saw prices going up, so you borrowed money to expand. Or you looked at, wow, look at everyone making money. I'm going to borrow money and start my own business. Example, which I mentioned before in class, is the great coffee shop boom in Helena in 2005. All of a sudden, all over town, little coffee shops, all over town. Almost all of them. Yeah, almost all. There's a few left, but a few. All went under. What happens to prices? What happens to prices if there's oversupply? Prices begin to plummet. Now, it might not be a lot, but prices drop a little bit. But if you borrowed money, you got to pay your debt payment next month. Prices are dropping. If prices drop, what happens to profits or profits? They begin to drop too. Notice I crammed that in there? You impressed? Prices and profits. Hey, what you need to do? Prices are dropping because of overproduction. How do you get out of this crap? You still got your debts to pay next month. What do you do? If prices are dropping because of overproduction, what's the logical thing to do? If you say, I'll cut back on production, but if you cut back on production, that means you sell less. If you sell less, then you pay your debt. If you cut back on production, what if your competitors don't? And they sell more and you're put out of business. This is counterintuitive, but it happens every single time. Just like when people think it's going to go on forever, and when prices begin to drop, they roll the die and produce more. Every single time. Every single time. I'll give you an example of this in action. You ever see a store and all of a sudden they have like a 50% offset, or a restaurant having Sunday now it's all you can eat? What's going on? They're not making money. They're desperate just to get people in. But if you make a big sale like that, you have to go back to debt. Whenever you see a place that does that, you know, it's just, you know, it's actually really sad. Especially, you know, the people. I have a friend who has a bar, restaurant, and farms. And we try those things. There's no chance. So eventually, prices keep dropping to the point we're kind of making the curve down now. We start making cutbacks. So either companies begin to shut their doors or there's layoffs. They start cutting back on workers. But if you start cutting back on workers, what happens to demand? Demand begins to drop. All of a sudden, workers don't buy as much. But remember I told you the story when just a few people lose their job, people who have their jobs will start cutting back. That's what begins to happen. People begin to be very careful with their money. So if demand begins to drop, what happens to companies? What happens to their profits if demand's dropping? So these are the dual engines. You get this first oversupply loop, and then you get the cutback loop. And once that happens, that is what we call right here a recession. When this happens, that's a recession. We start getting that cycle of layoffs. And then a bubble begins to form. The bubble's already starting here, but the bubble gets bigger here. Now, this might seem counterintuitive, but just imagine you're looking at the world, especially if you made investments that aren't paying back as much. What do you want to do? Make up the difference. That's where you start getting people, speculators, making crazy bets, and banks making even more risky loans because they can see their profits dropping. So they start this last gasp into making money. So the recession that began the Great Depression began in the summer of 1928, but the crash did not begin. The crash did not happen until October of 29. The recession that you guys started actually began in 2007, but the financial crash happened in 2008. So you guys were really talented to start an economic crash a year before you were born. That's talent. Use it for good from now on. So what happens? What will the bubble do eventually? And when the bubble bursts, that's when you get to right here. The bank panic, a bank panic, and then the bust. And that is it. So let's read. Bubble burst, bank panic, bust. So last thing for today. Let's go through this list again. If there's a bust, what happens to the demand? Down. Prices. Down. No one's buying anything, so everyone's have to cut back their prices. How about, so inflation, when we have inflation, what do we have? And they started calling this the deflationary curve. Deflationary curve. Next, what happens to supply? Wages. Wages begin to drop. We saw this with the railroad strike. Unemployment? Up. Unemployment up. Are banks willing to loan money? The banks to survive are terrified. Nobody trusts anybody. Debt? Here's the bad part. What happens to debt? It goes up again. They can't get out of debt. There's more debt here, and trying to pay off their debt leads to more debt. There's a term for this. It's actually called debt deflation. And then, how's the mood? Hey, remember the mood during a boom? It's going to go on forever. The mood during a bust? Nobody trusts anybody. People hide their money. They hunker down. I'm not kidding. People lose trust in each other. They begin to lose faith in the system. Maybe the government. Maybe the whole country. And it gets really scary about it. That's what happened in the winter of 32, 33. That's what happened in 1877. And we're still kind of living through a little bit. This mood gets dark. And how long is it going to last? And so, after the quiz tomorrow, we will pick up this right here. This is exciting. You know how I'm going to get out of this? Anybody know? That there's going to be a bunch of new transcontinental railroads being funded by the government. Hint. Okay. What? Oh, one thing I had to add about this. Nobody's buying anything. That's what. Nobody wants to buy anything. Nobody wants to spend. How do you get people spending? That's the thing. How do you get people spending?
Before 2008. Yeah, how dare we cause a recession? You know the real crime we were even for? The real crime is